we're going to begin. And um, last we studied Romans 12. So we're going through the book of Romans, and we're coming across. Once you pass chapter 11, it gets really practical, and that's what it's going to look like till we finish the book of Romans. So let's all turn to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. Sec. And so chapter 12, and we did 1 and 2 before. Uh, and 1 and 2 says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to prepare your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. By testing, you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, and what is acceptable. And when we went through Romans chapter 12, 1 to 2, we talked about the response, the test, and the result. So the response, remember, this is after 9, 10, and 11, which talks about the state of Israel, national Israel. So 1 to 8 was in reference to salvation. Okay, it was in reference to salvation. And when it comes to salvation, Paul ends in chapter 8 by saying that the Holy Spirit, we need the Holy Spirit in our function, our sanctification. And then you would expect chapter 12 to happen right away because it seems like a smooth transition. But in reality, he pauses and he does chapter 9, 10, and 11. Chapter 9 is the past tense of Israel, or the past of Israel. Chapter 10 is the present of Israel, and chapter 11 is the future tense of Israel, which is that there will be a gathering, there will be a renewal, or almost a revival of ethnic Israel when it comes to salvation. Then Paul goes to chapter 12, and he says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercy of God, to prepare your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God. That's the response, okay? To offer yourself. How? Remember the grace of God, by the mercies of God. What? Your life. And why? Because it's reasonable. It's logical. Okay? The testing of that is number 2, and it talks about, well, in verse 2, is that you will be either conformed or transformed. You'll either be conformed by the external world, not the world behind me, as you see in the but what I mean is the pressures of desires against God, all combined societally. Let's consider the world. Okay, you can be conformed by that, or you can be transformed internally by God. And if that's the case, if you choose transformation, then it leads to the result, and that is knowing the very will of God. And when I say know the will of God, don't think of the will of God. And a lot of people, I see this with a lot of people, is that when it comes to the will of God, it's always deterministic. Okay, when I say deterministic, I mean God wanted you in one city versus the other. He wanted you to live in this place versus this. He wanted you to... And I think there's a place for that, but when we get too detailed, sometimes the will of God is general versus detailed or specific. That makes sense. So, and you know this as you are responsive. You offer yourself as a sacrifice. You pass a test. You conform, or you're transformed from within. When a person's at that state, they're able to live this life with accuracy, as is. When that happens, okay? So, then we go on to verses, we're going to do 3 to 8 today. Okay, verses 3 to 8. Could someone read verses 3 to 4 out loud? 3 to 4.
For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function.
Now, after verses 1 and 2, he talks about the response to offer yourself, the test to be transformed, not conformed, and the result is you know the will of God. And then he goes into verse 3, and now he's talking about perception of self, saying in verse 3, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with what? Sober judgment according to the measure of faith that was assigned." Okay, so listen. "For by the grace of God, to me, I say to everyone not to think of himself more highly than he ought to." Okay, one of the signs or ways a person grows, you grow in your faith, I grow in my faith, that is not talked about enough, but it is a reality. And as you've seen from this verse and many other verses, but a reality, and you know it as you live life, is that a key component to this spiritual life is knowing yourself. A key component to this spiritual life is knowing yourself. And that might sound contrary to something you've heard about knowing God, which is true. It's just, when I say knowing yourself, it's how to properly view yourself. Okay? So, think of this. Knowing, assessing yourself with accuracy and with humility is what the Bible's plea is. So the reality is this. There are times in life where a lot of us, most of us, we don't have a proper view of ourselves. We don't have a proper view of ourselves, and it could lead to catastrophic results when that happens. And this is contrary to what you hear, I guess, in church atmospheres where it's knowing God. And mind you, we're all called to know God, but in the process of knowing God, there is also there is a view that you have towards yourself. For instance, all of us, everyone, has a view of God. We have a view of people, and we have a view of ourselves. We have a view of God. We have a view of people, and we have a view of ourselves. And the point is this: are those views accurate? Are those views accurate? We talk about God, that's theology, and there are inaccurate views of God. We call heresy or false doctrine, and there's inaccurate views of people, and there's also inaccurate views of ourselves. So remember, this is talking about an accurate view of yourself. You might have a view of yourself, but the question is this: how accurate is that view? Okay, due to pride, due to arrogance, and many other factors such as a bad upbringing. When you hear the discussion of how they ended up to be the way that they were, Hitler, Mother Teresa, on and on and on. There's nature and there's nurture. Nature, Paul talks about in Romans chapter 1-3. But there's also nurture too. Your environment. Who are your parents? Who are your friends growing up? Were there any experiences, positive, negative, etc.? On and on and on, that develop a person. And these experiences mold a view of ourselves. Okay, and the thing is this: with our nature screams the lie of Genesis chapter 3 from Satan to Eve. That was Satan's desire, Isaiah 14, Ezekiel chapter 28, and that is, I will ascend to the hill of the Most High God. I will ascend. This is a desire to be God. Okay? To possess full autonomy, to possess full control, to possess full power. Okay? If you really look at humanity, anthropology, sociology, this is what humans fight every day. We fight for our own control. We fight for our own power, right? And in essence, a lot of this is a plea, a desire to be like God. Okay? Now, as a result, remember, when we're thinking, there is a pursuit from childhood for full autonomy, for full control. You snatch a toy out of a baby's hands, crying, control. Okay? We have a pursuit for a fight for attention, a fight for fame. When you turn 12, 13, and you bring it to school and you show off and all that. You have mental health struggles, right? And then all of a sudden, have you ever heard? That's why I mentioned last week. Main character syndrome. Main character syndrome. This is where a person thinks that they're the main character of the entire world. So when they're living life, they're almost narrating their own movie in their head. But in this movie, they're the main character. Right? So born in Columbus, Ohio, Johnny was, and they'll play it on. And at the end of the day, if there's an enemy, they're the bad guy. Who's the good guy? You're the good guy. Right? And you can see this lived out through a lot of people in social media today. I think I mentioned it last week, where it's like people will set up a camera and put it at the gym, and it's like it's a public area, and someone will walk by, and you can see the person get so angry, so upset, and you wonder, you're like, it's a public area, but what's going on in the person's mind, their own psychology? Main character syndrome. Question: how does that person perceive themselves? How do they perceive themselves? Most likely, they're the main character. The person that walked by their camera, that's the villain. How dare they interrupt my scene? Right? Main character syndrome. Okay? Now, an intoxicated self-view brings about confusion, mental health, and it hinders spiritual growth. Okay? No one is immune to an over-exaggerated view of yourself. No one. We're all susceptible to it, no matter what in life. Okay, no matter what. So, have you guys seen the film Big Fish?
I think so. A long time ago.
Big Fish. Do you guys know what film I'm talking about?
I do, but it's been years and years ago. No?
Would you say that came out like what? Like
I didn't hear.
15 years ago? Maybe 15 years ago?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Anyways, so in Big Fish, okay, it's about a guy, and it's about the concept of big fish but in a little pond. If a big fish in a little pond, he's perceived as big. So the fish will say, I'm such a big fish. But once that fish goes into a bigger pond and there's bigger fish, how does that fish psychologically deal with himself? Does he maintain the thought that he had in the previous pond, or does he bring it over into the new pond? You see? And this character in this film was always telling stories about himself. And as he's telling stories about himself, there's a lot of exaggeration in it, and you don't know that till the very end. A very interesting life, but he lives this life, and it's not till the very end you see the exaggeration. So he talks about him being friends with Siamese twins, and they're in the circus, and then you find out to the end of the film they're just twins, not Siamese, but he added it. Right, picking and choosing to make himself perceive as big. People deal with that when they move to Los Angeles or New York, meaning that they're the big fish in Delaware. They're the big fish in Calgary, Alberta, right? But the minute they come to LA and they want to show, right? They carry that, oh, so big in my town. Next thing you know, they're like, they're just normal, right? Now, how does that person psychologically deal with himself, right? Because they're in their mind, they're the big fish. Right? So at the end of the day, we're all immune. No, we're all susceptible to over exaggerating our own self perception. Okay, and I want to say this. Remember, we have a view, but is that view accurate? Without an accurate view, I want to say this. It is impossible. I'll say this. It is almost impossible to have a good spiritual life, a good life that is freeing in Christ, without having a proper view of yourself. Without being honest with yourself. Okay. Self-examination is vital to spiritual growth. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 13:5, remember where Paul says where he said he talks about knowing thyself. Remember the scene in Matthew chapter 7 where they're saying, "Lord, Lord, we prophesied in your name, we cast out demons in your name," and God says to them, "I never knew you. Depart from me." The whole point of that is they thought they knew themselves, but they didn't. They thought they had a good spiritual state, but they didn't. Right? They never were honest with themselves, and as a result, they believed the lie that they were who they projected themselves to be. It's a lack of true examination. 2 Corinthians 13:5. Examine yourself. Test to see that you're of the faith, Paul says. Okay? So, without this sense of self-examination, of being honest with yourself, you can't really grow as far as God, growing with God. Okay? So, think of theology. Theology is your view of God, and think of anthropology, your view of man. Okay? It's the study of anthropology is not really talked about enough, and I think we should, as far as humanity, our desires, us as a whole. But you have to have a proper understanding of God and you yourself in order to fully really live a Christian life. And here's what I mean by that. How? Oh, hi, Elaine.
Hi, Ruben.
Good to see you. It's almost Elaine. We're in Romans. We're in Romans 12. Romans chapter 12, verses 3 to 8.
Okay.
Romans chapter 12, verses 3 to 8. And we're just on verse 3.
I see.
So think of this. Okay, so what I'm saying is you can know God, you could read the Bible, but remember, if you if you're not honest with yourselves, how could you apply the truths of God, the characters of God, the truths of Scripture to your personal life if you don't know where to apply it to? Because you're not honest with yourself. So think of this. Think of going to the gym. Okay, if you're at a gym, and there's a person that knows the machinery left and right. Knows it left and right. And he works out. Lifts dumbbells. But he has no clue how his health is because he doesn't know his own body. He doesn't know his own body. So all that knowledge of the gym, of weights and exercise and nutrition, is almost pointless because, again, what are you applying it to? Right? Your legs, your back, proportion, what's the size of this person? What is he trying to get? Is he trying to get lean? Is he what's his background with his health? You see, so there's weights, but there's also the body. You have to know your body in order to apply the weights to their body. You see, to get an accurate to get a healthy dose of who you are. Very similar to God is that you can know the Bible, you can know God, you can know the books of the Bible, but again, you apply these truths to specific holes, areas in your own heart, right? To you as a result, right? So remember, it's if for example, if someone's dealing with anxiety, for instance, anxiety, what that is, it's an uneasiness towards unknown knowledge about yourself. Okay, so if there's a 4-hour gap in your day tomorrow, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen in those 4 hours, right? There's a part of you that wants to know. So it's pretty much a flex of control for those 4 hours. Okay, so that's what anxiety is. It's an uneasiness towards the future, primarily about yourself. Now, what attribute of God can really help that person with anxiety? So I'm examining myself, but then there's God. How do I apply God to that situation?
So, like, speaking to him, voicing your concern.
Yeah. How about God's sovereignty, and how about man's inability? Accepting man's inability to not know that. So these are biblical truths. You see, so what I did is I got the Bible, I got the sovereignty of God, and I applied it to the specific situations of this person's life, of a lack of. But you see that? So what I did is I got theology, and I got an honest evaluation of the person dealing with anxiety, and I applied it. You see, so it only makes sense. So this is really where growth happens, is when the two of them are connected. You ever see when people go to therapy, right? You go to counseling, and the whole point of this counseling is you're talking to someone, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, I didn't know that about me. Oh, I didn't know. Wow, I didn't know I did that because of X, Y, and Z." Right? And what it is, it's a realization. It's I lived 40 years of my life. I lived 50 years of my life thinking one way about myself, and all of a sudden an event happened. Next thing you know, I view myself differently. What that implies is they truly didn't have a proper view of themselves. 2 Corinthians 13:5. Examine yourself, Paul says. You see, true spirituality happens when those two connect. When self-honesty happens, anthropology, and God, theology, connect. If you just know theology, you might be like a Pharisee, all theoretical, right? But you want to apply it to who? Yourself, right? And this is where I think it was Socrates that says the unexamined life is not worth living, and then there was oracles that says know thyself. It sounds like a counter message to what we hear in Christianity, but I'm saying it is very true, right? And when Paul says know yourself, not to boast or to flaunt, but again, it's part of the sanctifying process. Right after verse 1 and 2, verse 3 goes right into it. Okay. Any questions as of now?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay.
A whole group of people be led in a direction where they're denying, if they're being led in a certain doctrine or a different direction, that you really don't examine yourself, and continue to go ahead and do that for years and years, if they fulfill the leadership's rules and regulations, or this type of thing. What I'm getting at, I mean, is there religions, or even within Christianity, that don't say, do this, do that, do this, do that. That's what you're supposed to do, and that's what's going to be pleasing to God. That don't even really look at themselves. Is my question. Is that relevant? Does that happen? Is that common?
Yeah, I'd like to know what in particular. I'd like to know what when I say I'd like to know what in particular, I mean what doctrine?
Well, the Pharisees, the Judaizers, living by the law, keeping the law, get circumcised on the 8th day. I'm talking about literally living the law without a self-examination and without a desire to have a real personal relationship with God.
Yeah, yeah. So what I hear you saying is they think they're better off than they really are. When I hear that,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
very common. Is when again when I'm saying have an accurate view of yourself, is most people think they're better off than they really are, or lower. One of the two. One of the two. We're gonna talk about that next. Yeah.
okay,
No, no, no,
okay.
no, no. But
I'm asking you just how prevalent is it? I'm asking you how prevalent is it?
oh,
Because it says in Matthew 7, I know you not, but I healed in your name. I did this, I did that. Basically, what I'm asking or what I'm saying, I'm not sure what I'm doing half the time. But some doctrines teach living by the law. Okay, this is what you do in the book of James. This is what you do to prove that you're a Christian. And so they go out to go ahead and prove that they're a Christian without understanding the true sovereignty of God and not understanding God's grace. If that's not understood, then why would there be an examination of self?
yeah. Um, Remember, you have to because you have to know where to apply that to, right? It's all application, right? You have to have some sense of knowledge of yourself, right? You don't hear that. You don't hear a lot of this because a lot it's equivocation. And when I say equivocation, if you hear the word self in the Gospels, you think of Jesus, right? Die to self daily, Luke chapter 9, which is true. But remember, when he says die to your flesh, yourself daily, what is self? That's your ego, right? But again, there's equivocation. It could mean that part, the negative part. But when I say self, and when we say self, it means just your whole being, who you are, why you respond the way you do, why you like what you do, right? Do you really like that product, or are you doing it to get the attention of X, Y, right? People, right? Questions like that. Being honest with yourself is what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense, Danny?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It makes sense.
So a big component to this, okay, is humility. This is the real. This is the real. It's a lot of misconception, but it's the real. Uh, it's the real solution to this, of getting through this. Okay, um, know your place in the world. Okay, C.S. Lewis says, humility is not thinking less of yourself; it's thinking of yourself less. He says in the book Mere Christianity. Okay, now if you hear humility, what do you typically think of?
What?
If you hear the word, if you hear humility, what do you typically think of?
Humility?
Yeah, humility.
Um, well, people have a funny way of like avoiding, um, myself included, avoiding questions, avoiding probes from another person, or just avoiding intimacy, or like avoiding what could be a thorn in the flesh, like, you know, like it, cause it's like it's painful to address something that you've done wrong, or like something that you're like, you don't even know you're doing wrong, and you need to be like, you know, reprimanded for it, or like, you know, it's like, so humility's, you know, it's engaging, because I feel like a prideful person, or like someone that is arrogant, like they don't engage, they avoid it.
People who has weakness, that they're weak people.
So wait. What if you're humble, you're weak? Is that it, Bonnie?
Some people think that. I don't think that it is,
Yeah.
but some people feel like they're weak people. But
Yeah.
they're very strong people, most of them, yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of times when we think of humility in the Christian world or just in general, it's exactly what Bonnie was saying. A lot of humility is typically perceived as self-degradation.
Yeah.
Because it's a reaction to pride, being I'm so great, I'm so high, I'm so mighty. So if pride is that, then humility is therefore the opposite, and humility is I'm so weak, low, useless, worthless,
Masochistic.
masochistic, right? And that's exactly what it is. You see, so I want you to think of humility like this: humility is accurate and is proper perception. True humility, the state, is you view yourself accurately in the world, and it's neither up or down; it's in the middle. And here's what I mean by that. If pride is, remember, nurturing, right? Nurturing environment, something happens, you're always good at whatever, it hits us differently. But if pride is, I'm so great, I'm so mighty, true humility is I view myself in proper order in the world. I see my place. Remember, we're talking about how you view yourself, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of people need to think better about themselves, actually, right? Some people who think right here, they need to elevate themselves a little as far as the way. Yeah, you're an image bearer of God. Yeah, you deserve dignity. You're better than that person, right? You some people have to, right? And that's what I'm saying. It's an accurate view of yourself. But so remember, it's not I am God. It's not that I'm nothing. It's that you view yourself in the created order of the world, right? You're not God. You're below God. You're above the animals, biblically. You're an image bearer, right? That's exactly you function in proper perception of the world, but this perception, this right order, only happens when you view God accurately. When you view God accurately, meaning you see God for who He truly is. You see God for who He truly is. You see your proper stance in comparison to everything else in the world. Okay, so if I encounter God, if say Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah sees God in the throne room, and what does he do? He falls to his face, right? Woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. And I dwell among what? People of unclean lips. So he sees himself in a proper perception, sees other people in a proper perception, but he sees it after what? Encountering God. Right? He views himself rightly, accurately. Again, kind of what I was saying before, is that if I were to stand in front of the Grand Canyon and say, I am so big and mighty. No. When you stand in front of the Grand Canyon, you say, "Whoa, that is magnificent," and what? I'm small. Proper perception in comparison, but it's in comparison to what? The Grand Canyon, right? Sean Bradley. I know. Sean Bradley. He was a 7'6" basketball player. If you have the film Space Jam with Michael Jordan, Bugs Bunny, back in the 90s, but he was the tall guy, and when I was in high school here in Toronto, I saw him at a game, and I was standing on like this booth, and I'm just looking at him, huge, 7'6", and imagine I walk away after that encounter with Sean Bradley and be like, I'm such a big guy, I can dunk on him if I wanted to. You would think I'm crazy, and that's exactly right. If I were to walk away with that mindset, guess what? I'm not viewing myself accurately. I'm delusional. Main character syndrome, right? He's the bad guy. I'm the good guy. I'm the big one, right? No, in reality, I view myself in proper order. I was I'm 5'9". Now I was probably like 5'5" then. You know, grade. You know, here in Canada, we don't use freshmen and all those. We use like grade 9, 10, 11, 12. So I was in grade 10 or 9 around that time. So, but again, perception. You see something grand, big. It should give you it should give you what? Accuracy of self. Accuracy. Okay? But remember, it's not I'm so grand, pride, or I'm dirt, I'm nothing. It's I view myself in proper order with the rest of humanity and creation. Okay? So, remember, not too high, not too low, accurate. An accurate view. Okay? And remember, like kind of what Bonnie was saying, a lot of Christians live like that. Like, for myself, I'm being honest, I lived a good portion of my Christian life like that, knowing that, or like thinking that, meaning that in order to be humble, I always had to talk so low about myself and have this low mindset, and it's to be what? Perceived as humble. Notice the word I just used, perceived. Perceived as humble. That's the worst part about it. So you talk low, you talk soft, you know, things like that, where it's like, if that's how you naturally are, that's different. That's a different discussion. But if, say, there's something where you excel at, but you act like you don't know it, or you talk down, you know, and you perceive that as humility, you know, again, we have to be honest with ourselves. Remember when Jesus says, yeah, someone greater than Solomon is here. Whoa, right? Like it could be perceived as arrogant, but it's true. Jesus is better than Solomon. He is more wiser than Solomon. It's true. That's a proper perception. It's perception, accurate perception. So think of humility not as an action, but as a mindset. Okay, not as an action, but as a mindset. A lot of people, when they think of humility, they want to act humbly. I have to act. I have to do, right? So I sit at the back, or I have to shovel everyone's snow, and you know, like actions. If you want to shovel people, fine, go do that. But again, it's not I'm doing this because I'm humble. No, humility is a state of the heart, state of the mind. Right? Proper self-perception. But only happens when you encounter God. True encounters with God. I think it's, what is it? Isaiah chapter 3. One of my favorite passages, actually. I think it's in Isaiah chapter 3, where he says, they will be humbled when they encounter God, and there will be no arrogance that comes forth from their lips. I'm slightly paraphrasing. But the whole point is when you encounter God, the arrogance won't come out of you. It won't. Because you've encountered the Grand Canyon. Bigger. Bigger. You see that? Any questions?
Yeah, so Ezekiel 28 in the prophecy of Ty.
Yes. I see where you're going.
What?
No, continue. Ezekiel 28. That's the fall of Lucifer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is it just that one section, or is it the whole chapter?
No, it's that one section. So it is in reference. So Isaiah 14. I don't want to go. Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 are the Old Testament passages that typically refer to Satan as far as his fall. But if you see the context, it's also referring to another king. But it could be a double meaning in it, and that's how it's usually taken. Yeah.
So it's just in reference to the mutiny that he did, in sequestering the other, like, angelic beings, and then they're cast out. But it's also like a meaning of like the fallen nature of man in their heart.
Yeah.
Like when they're basically born as children of the devil.
Yes.
Okay. Before they're redeemed.
Yep. Yes.
That's pretty interesting. But what does the foreigners have to do with it? Like the foreigners come in, like.
Well, do you mind if we go look at that passage another time, Kevin? Ezekiel 28 you're talking about, right?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I was just curious.
Very good. Any other questions in reference to this?
Well, I think it's like a mirror. Like you need to have an accurate view of yourself, but you also need to have an accurate view of God. And that was the whole point of the interaction, or that was like one of the points of the interaction between Isaiah and God, was he saw the accurate depiction of the Christ, like enthroned in heaven. The train of his robe filled the temple, like he was high and lifted up. So it's like he had an accurate view of who he is, and then he also had an accurate view of himself and the people that he's with, which is basically, wicked, and then, the judgment and the burning and the, like, refining of the coal, is just symbolic of, like, Christ, and, how Christ was, faced the wrath of God for our sin.
Yeah.
And the coal was so hot that the angel had to use tongs, like, and the angel's like burning hot too.
Yeah.
So it's like a symbolism of like how hot like the fire of God is.
Yeah. Isaiah 6. Where notice how it says this. But to think with what? Sober judgment. But to think with sober judgment, he says in verse 3. Sober judgment. What do you think of when you hear sober judgment?
Well, sober judgment, it refers to like, the common like drugs, like, drugs and alcohol. But it also means like the drug, the inoculation of like idols, or like finery or luxury. So it could be anything. It could be money. So like that can lead you to be like not sober.
Someone said something at church, I believe.
And I said, mine says, but to think so as to have sound judgment.
Sound. Same, I'd say. When you think of sober, what is that? What do you mean?
To be in tune with reality around you, to know what's going on.
Yeah. We usually think, are you sober? Right? Sober-mindedness, meaning single.
Yeah.
Whole. 1 Peter 5:8. Be sober-minded. 2 Timothy 4:5. Always be sober-minded. Okay, so be sober-minded. Paul says what? In Ephesians 5, do not be drunk with debauchery, but what? Be filled with the Spirit. So, don't be drunk. When you're drunk, your mind's and all, right? You're not sound. You're slurring. You don't even know you're not all there. Right? Sober. You're in multiple places, right? Remember what James says, you double you're the double-minded man, unstable in all his ways in James 1. Double-minded man. That's like you're drunk. Your mind's in a million places. You're walking over there. You're walking here. Right? That's anti-sober-mindedness. Right? Sober meaning aligned, focused. Okay? Your entire being is focused. Okay? A lot of times our hearts are disheveled and we say, I gotta focus. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that. Your heart needs to be in the right place in order for true liberty of the mind to happen. Okay? That's sober-mindedness. Okay? Sober-mindedness. So essentially, you have pride that we're born into this world with, and then from this world, there's persona. I think Carl Jung talks about that. Then you have the double-minded man. You have two different mindsets, two different ways. And at the end of the day, a lot of us live like that. It's an improper view of self. An improper view of self. Okay? The sad part about that, a lot of people live this life, and they die, not just not knowing God, but not knowing who they really were. Right? Could have been some event that happened when they were 8, when they were 20, when something happened in life that it really paralyzed, traumatized them. They couldn't get out of it. They were still in that moment. They were just on replay over. How could that over and over? And it's like they never had that opportunity to grow, to truly grow. Because remember, I don't believe it's possible to actually grow spiritually unless there's that honesty within yourself. Okay? When those counseling moments have, I didn't know that, oh my. That's all illumination of who you are. And then once that happens, guess what happens? True application of God happens. Right? Remember, I think it's in 2 Corinthians 12, where Paul was given a thorn in the flesh. And what did he say? So that he would not be what? Conceited. Proud. In other words, because Paul experienced the third heaven, he had that opportunity to be proud, to be like, wow, I'm so special. The minute that's happening to him, he's not viewing himself properly. Right? As a result, God put that there in order for him to what? Have a proper view of yourself. Stay there, Paul. Stay there. Okay? Any questions? No?
I mean, it's with on each of Jesus' side, like on the cross, like they were, pierced and bound so that they would suffocate and die, like so they were condemned to die, and it's just I feel like it's like I'm not experiencing that right now, but it's like I feel like it's the indictment against man is just we're so screwed without like the mercy of God, and out of God's own mercy what he bestowed upon us through his son, like without that, like it's like all the warnings that were given, it's like I fail each one, like it's like when I read it, it's just like I was like, that's me,
This ruined so many people's lives. So many people. And what I'm saying it ruined so many people's lives is a lot of people in church, even outside of church, they're just not honest with themselves as far as their reality, who they are, what happened to them. And without that, people suffer. It's almost impossible to grow in life without that. Right? He continues, and he says, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. There's two interpretations, that God has assigned different forms of faith to a lot of people, or an equilibrium. That being that God has given humanity a sense of equal faith, equal standing. N.T. Wright, the famous theologian, he believes that as far as the equilibrium of faith. So Romans 5:1, Therefore, being justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Justification, okay, that's faith. We know Christ by faith, therefore we're justified. That's an experience. And I've mentioned that to you many times. You know, Protestants debate this, Catholics debate this. One says it's a moment, others say it's a process. At the end of the day, we're at the end. When someone says you're justified by faith, does that change your life? Again, or is it just theory? Is it theory? But a true understanding, remember, of justification by faith. That's life. That's life changing. That's an Isaiah 6 moment of Isaiah seeing God. He saw God. Right? Okay. Verse 4 and 5. For as, so we're in Romans 12, verse 4 and 5. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. Okay, so Paul here, we all have different abilities, right? We're all one, but don't have the same function here. So here, Paul in verse 4 and 5, Paul talks about this concept of unity and diversity. Okay, so here in verse 4 and 5, all the way to the end, it's essentially how do we serve alongside others with knowing who we are. Okay, so we have a proper perception of ourselves, but how do you, with a true understanding of yourself, minister, serve to those of us around us? Okay, so here we're all one, we're all one body, but we have different gifts. Paul says. Can someone read where you're at? 1 Corinthians 12. 12 to 21, because Paul also, this is the second time Paul uses the body with many gifts. He uses the physical body as an illustration. 1 Corinthians 12, 17 to 21. Can someone read that out loud? Again, Paul's imagery of the body that he uses here.
Where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body. God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as He chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. I cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor can the head to the feet, I have no need of you. The end.
Oh, so this is the famous 1 Corinthians 12 passage of one body but different parts, and the whole point of it, unity and diversity. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, this is the church of Corinth that was very gifted, but they weren't unifying in what? Chapter 13, which is, if I speak of the tongues of men and angels, but I have not love, I'm what? A noisy gong or a clanging cymbal, right? So essentially, you could have all the spiritual gifts you want, but if you don't function with a heart, love, what is it? You're nothing. Nothing. And guess what? The church of Corinth, they never understood it. They had many gifts. That's one of the most blinding moments of a person, when they're very gifted, have a lot to offer, but guess what? They're not honest with themselves about that. They think they're too special. They think they're too grand, and they're not functioning in love. Chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians. Right? And that's exactly what Paul is talking about. So very similar here. Are you honest with yourself? Be honest with yourself. right? And then from that honesty, view yourself in sober judgment. Guess what? You're not alone. You're part of a body. And this body has many, many gifts, talents, abilities. Okay? So being part of the body prevents us from thinking too highly of ourselves. The reason why? Because we need the body. We need the body. Also, it prevents us from thinking too lowly of ourselves. Remember, pride, we think too high. And we also think that humility is what? Low, self-degradation. That's also pride. Because both of them, it's an inaccurate view of who you are. Right? And if we think too lowly of ourselves, guess what? The body needs us. The body needs us to function. Right? There's no room. Remember Luke chapter 18? There was a tax collector. And the Pharisee says, he beat his chest and he says, thank God I'm not like that guy over there. That comparison game. There's none of that in the body of Christ. Right? We need each other. Remember, there has to be that first self-examination. If someone that has gifts, let's just think practically. If someone has a lot of gifts in church, and they're not honest with themselves, and they walk into a room with many people, and they also have gifts too, but because the person who hasn't examined themselves walks into the room, guess what he's going to think? Superiority. I'm better. I don't need them. Thoughts like that happens all the time, right? But remember, what was wrong with that person? He was not honest with himself. Was not honest with himself, right? So remember, you cannot know yourself if you're always by yourself. You cannot know yourself if you're always by yourself. Okay, I think there's that proverb. What was it, Kevin? Proverbs 18:1 that says that he who himself, he seeks his own desire. Okay, so remember, you can be all by yourself all the time. Be in front of a computer, be on your phone, all that screen time, know things. But it's self-discovery doesn't happen when you're what? With people, functioning with your gifts, operating with your gifts. And not as an opportunity for your pride to be tickled, but for, again, unification of the body. Okay, you see yourself properly. Okay, so we don't really know who we truly are unless we're with other people. Okay, so this is why you always see. Go ahead, Kevin.
Paul was talking about the body of Christ, and then that they have all these gifts, but if they don't do it with love, then they're a noisy gong. But I forgot, like, people interpret that as they're talking about the church. I forgot, like, what was the misunderstanding with chapter 13 with, like, the love, or they use it for weddings, or I forgot what it was.
Oh, yeah. So essentially, and I'm very big on this point, by the way, with the one that you brought up. 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, it's typically perceived as romance, right? And if you read 1 Corinthians 13...
Oh, romance.
Yeah, remember, 1 Corinthians 13 is in between, 12 and 14. And what's 12? All about the gifts, the body, many members, but all functioning at the same time. Chapter 14, speaking in tongues and prophecy. So you have gifts in chapter 12, you have gifts in chapter 14, you have love in the middle. The whole point of it is that the Church of Corinth, they were very gifted at what they did, but they fought, they competed with each other. And what was missing? Love. A changed heart. But I can apply that passage, chapter 12, 13, and 14, to Romans chapter 12. Why? The Church of Corinth, they were not honest with themselves too. We can apply the exact same thing. But mind you, Paul is writing in Corinth, right, to the Romans, right now. Okay, so at the end of the day, it's the fruit of the Spirit has to function first before the gifting of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Galatians 5. Yeah. So character has to formulate before gifts are properly functioned. But the key one is love. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? No? All right. Can someone read?
I mean, it's like really. Shoot, I don't want to.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just think it. If you're a part of it and you understand it, I think it's the fact that you're included. It should give you a feeling of belonging.
Yes. It should.
Like,
It's
you know,
it's
if
remember, community, the heart of community is belonging. Okay? It is a human need. If there's a human being on the planet that doesn't feel belonged, they're gonna suffer. They're gonna suffer. We all need that to be fulfilled, right? And that's what I'm saying. When there's that lack of self-examination, and you walk in, it's all about you. You're the main character, and now you're competing with everyone. And this is what happened 2,000 years ago, in 1 Corinthians 12, 13, and 14. Right? They used the gifts so it wasn't about belonging. It wasn't about unity. It was about diversity, and it stayed there. Okay? Can someone read 5 to 8? Chapters 5, verses 5 to 8.
So we, though many are one in body in Christ, and individually members one of another, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, proportion to our faith; if service and serving; if the one who teaches in his teaching; the one who exhorts in his exhortation; the one who contributes in generosity; the one who leads with zeal; the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness.
All right. So
That's it.
Paul, 3 times, Paul will list out a bunch of gifts. One in Ephesians, one in 1 Corinthians 12, and in here. So here he lifts out multiple gifts. Remember, we're one body, but we all possess different gifts, right? And we're supposed to be unified. That's the very essence of it. But here he talks about the first gift Paul talks about is what? Prophecy. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. And Paul says, if prophecy. Okay? Now, Paul says prophecy. If prophecy, well, what do you guys think of prophecy? Whenever you hear the word, what comes to mind?
Something that'll be fulfilled in the future.
Prophemi. So, typically, that's how it's perceived. That's how it's viewed. Is when I say when you hear the word prophecy, it's Old Testament. So essentially, it's someone speaking something of the future that will happen, and it's not a lot of the charismatic kind of culture in the West use very very vague language. Like standing outside of a church one time, I was wearing something very similar. I had this hat that looked like this, and someone prophesied over me and says, do you play the guitar? Are you a musician? And it's like come on, I look like it's just the way I was dressed, right? But like prophecy in the Old Testament was very specific. You didn't have to ask questions. You knew. So there's going to be a guy standing there at 4:45. He's going to have a green hat. He's going to tell you this, and this is what you're going to, like, very detailed, and it always happened. Okay? That's Old Testament prophecy, and the prophecy that Paul talks about in the New Testament, prophemi, is typically in reference to preaching, the declaration. Okay? That's prophecy. Prophesying is also preaching. Okay? So this discussion about the gifts, where I stand is I believe that in the first century, these gifts, as far as that prophecy that you were talking about, Virginia, and speaking tongues and healing, it was normative in the first century. It was normative to prove a point. Okay, But I think that the gifts still persist, but I don't think they're as accessible as they were before. Say there's a guy, he walks by you and his shadow goes over and you'll be healed from a disease. Like if that were to be the case, we would see it more frequently. It's things like that still happen, but I don't think it happens as frequent, as normative as it was in the first century. Okay, and then Paul, verse 7, talks about some people meeting needs. So this is diakonia, deacon. This is where we get the word deacon, meaning to serve, to care. Some people serve; they truly care. Paul talks about also in verse 7. Some teach. Okay, some have the ability to teach here. Now, the gift of teaching is simply making the truth understood, making the truth clear. A good teacher may not be a good preacher. I want to make that, and a good preacher may not be a good teacher. Okay, it's possible to have both. Some are either or. Okay, now a teacher communicates information. A preacher communicates the end goal, transformation. Okay, big difference. Information, transformation. Okay, but here, some teach. They make what's known in the Bible or in the world more clear. Okay, verse 8, Paul talks about counsel or encouragement. The very essence of counsel, the root word is to come alongside someone as a sense of encouragement or inspiration. We all go through seasons and moments and days where we're very down, and it's hard to deal with it alone. And sometimes we need that extra voice, and friend to come alongside of us. Also in verse 8, Paul talks about some give generously, right? This is contributing. And when Paul says generously, this is material wealth here. So if you don't have material wealth, then this might, again, logically, it just might not be for the person. But it is a heart, and it is an ability to give generously. Also, he says in verse 8, some lead. Okay, this is the ability for people to follow you. Okay, and last he says, and some work with the poor and the sick. Okay, which is to serve in compassion or mercy ministry. This is, again, we're all called to serve the poor, but again, there's certain degrees, there's certain extent. I would say like Mother Teresa had this gift of serving the poor and the sick in Calcutta. Okay, so essentially, these gifts in chapters 12 could be broken down to 3 different giftings, meaning that first, speaking gifts. Okay, prophecy, teaching, exhorting, knowledge. Second, leading gifts, so government, administration, wisdom. And third, serving gifts, giving, mercy, hospitality. Okay, now, when it comes to giftedness, okay, discerning your gifts, because we're talking about gifts here, we go back to honest evaluation. Who are you? 2 Corinthians 13, examine yourself. Okay? To know your gifts is first self-examination, okay, experience, and execution. So for a self-examination, what I mean by that is being honest with yourself about what you're good at and what you're not good at. What you're good at and what you're not good at. Okay? A lot of people, in order to know that there has to be an inward call and an outward call. Notice this. An inward call and an outward call. An inward call is where you desire it. You want to do it. You have a desire to go to Mexico and build a house. That's mercy. Okay, but you have that. It's an inward call. There's a desire for a specific ministry. But there's also the outward call, and the outward call is when someone outside of yourself comes to you and they confirm the gift that you have. They say, hey, I noticed that you're good at X, Y, and Z. You're really good at interacting with people. You're really good at serving the poor. You're really good at administration. That's external call, the outward call. So there's the inward call, and then there's the outward call. Remember, sometimes there's the inward call. A lot of us desire things, but guess what? we might not be good at it. Okay? Happens all the time. You see people, they're like, man, I think God is calling me to sing. Maybe I should be the worship leader. And they have that desire. And then they go up in front of the church and we're just like, right? And you want to be polite and compassionate and all that, but in your mind, you're like, this person should never sing again. But so there's the inward call. The person wants to sing, but there's no outward call. There's no confirmation of that. Okay, it's a good way to see giftedness. Do you desire it, and is there an external call upon your life? Right. So first, self-examination as far as gifted. Second, experience, and this is where Paul says, "Let us use them." In verse 6, experience. Do you? And this takes time. Do you have you used these gifted? Have you used the gifts that God has given you? Okay, so self-examination, experience. Have you used them? And last, execution, where he says the one who does, meaning do it, go for it, right? Execution. Okay, so these are ways to discern the gifts. Now, I'm going to finish here, guys. Ourselves when it comes to God in verse 1 and 2. Paul in verse 1 and 2, this is where Paul says to offer yourself offer yourselves to God. Now, after you offer yourself to God, do you have a proper view of yourself? So there's that first dying to self, giving yourself to God, and from there, there's an honesty with that, with who you are, and from there, there's how you can contribute to the gifts to the church, to the body, and that's after you're honest with yourself, you serve. Right? And this is essentially what we talked about last week, is that love in proper order. There's that first, that you offer yourself. There's that you're honest with yourself. And then there's also you're honest with other people as far as the church and giftedness goes. Okay? This is in the Latin called the Ordo Amoris, which is love in proper order. I think Vice President J.D. Vance was in an interview and he mentioned, briefly talked, he didn't use Orus Amoris, he didn't say it, but described it, right? But it's love in proper order, right? Love in proper order. Are you honest with yourself? Do you have an accurate view of who you are? And from there, can you apply the character, the principles of God to your life? And that's when you grow. And then when you grow, guess what happens? You serve, you give. But you don't serve alone. You serve in a body with people who also have gifts too, and who also have to be what? Honest with themselves in life. You know, I want to speak to you guys my heart here. I'm noticing just in our time with young people, this is a generation of delusionment. This is truly a generation of people that think that they're something, but they're really not. And when I say something, I mean that they have a wrong view of who they are. And a lot of it comes with social media. Right, comes with certain apps and all these things. Because again, you can pump yourself out to look like something you're not, and that's fine. It's just that when you start to believe that, that's where the delusion happens. That's where the trap of deception happens. And once you're in that position, once you're in that mental state of yourself, all the theology in the world, all the Bible in the world won't do anything. Because how can you apply it to a hardened heart? How can you apply it to an arrogant heart? It's just going to accumulate into knowledge. It's just theory. You see that? So you have to have good theology, a good understanding of God, but good anthropology and a good vision of man. Yourself, but also other people too. And once those two merge and connect, that's when true spiritual growth happens. And what happens after that? This is where you apply your gifts to the church, and this is the logic that Paul has here. See that? Verse 1 and 2, offer yourself. Verse 3 and 4, about honesties, be sober-minded, a proper judgment. And then from verse 5, 6, 7, and 8, about giftedness as far as how you contribute that to the body. Okay? Any questions, guys?
It's we're living in such a different time in terms of the avatar, like the digital avatar of ourselves, or like the digital self versus the actual self,
Yeah.
and the monetization of the delusion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the false self is monetized, or like how I want you to see me is monetized.
Yeah.
So if I want you to believe that, like, I'm so good at, like, checkers or something, or like if I want you to believe that I'm a good, I don't know, football player or something, like, that's such a lame example, but it's like you can, like, pretty much, like, create an image self with, I'm, on vacation, and I'm, drinking this drink, and, I'm driving this car, or, I'm, at this party, or like whatever it is. You can create, like, you basically just, it's like the same thing as like the 1700s of, the masquerade. Like, people wear masks,
Yes.
but now it's just, a digital mask. So it's just kind of like,
Or COVID mask.
yeah, COVID mask.
Right.
But it's like, that's the thing, like, do you want to be carried away in the, the Pied Piper masquerade? Like, do you enjoy living in the false self? Like, does that please you? Like, do you feel fulfilled with emptiness and empty things of the world, or will you be, like, will you be enticed and, like, drawn into, like, the true self, which is, the made in God's image self, and the fallen, rebellion, the fallen, sinful person, and then, redeemed by mercy and grace alone.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, it's just, I think when you have so many different, like, amenities, and, like, just so many things that seem fulfilling in life, like, you just get kind of lulled away and drawn away. It's like just drifting in a boat.
Yeah.
Like, it's just crazy.
The progressive kill. Those are the worst kills. Remember the illustration of the frog, right? You put a frog in water, it just jumps out. You put it in room temperature and slowly boil it, and that's slow death. And that's the way sin works. That's the way pride works. It's slow. And those are the words.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of
the reason why the hot water is noticeable is because you see it. The slow water, the problem with that is you don't see it. So when you start to, you're different, but you can't see it, and everyone else can. It's the slowness that deceives. You know that? It's the slowness. Okay. How's everyone at the church?
We're good.
Everyone's good there. All right. Is anyone there?
Everyone's here. Everyone's here.
No. Has the other church?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Because I talked to Jack, and I told him about what happened last week, and I said, make sure they come at 8. Okay. So yeah, I said I don't want them rushing and running. I don't want. So yeah, all right. Because I'm just looking at the time right now, so I want to be conscientious of that. So all right, guys. Any questions before we do communion?
No.
All right.